So I just want to ask a quick question. Raise your hands if you work in consultancy. Okay. And if you work in-house for a product? Okay. So just to give a bit of context, we work for consultancy and we work across many different products that are always in a different stage. So we're going to take you through a journey with one of our clients who's actually in the audience today. So I'm going to try and be careful what I say. Can't speak for Antonas. But yeah, so we're going to take you through what initially started off as a UX UI framework that ended up becoming a more holistic design systems piece of work.
Now, when we say design system, just to get started, let's define it for the time being as a living body of discipline-specific guidelines, reusable assets, and rules how to apply them. Now, having this doesn't mean that we all are always on the same page, because design systems quite often tend to talk about how, but not why. And you might end up in a situation where different individuals in the company will have a different criteria for quality, success, or value. And there is a misalignment between individuals and the teams. So, oops, that's what I said. Which is why I'm not going to focus on the building blocks or the how part, but we'll be focusing more on why and how we're trying to bring different people in the company, not just engineers and designers, but also managers and business developers on the same page, sharing a unified vision for the product and for the company. Now, Hana, would you like to take over and tell me a heartbreaking or heartwarming story how Facebook ripped off Snapchat?
So hands up anyone who remembers when Facebook completely copied Snapchat stories. So now they didn't copy it once, they copied it across all of their core products. And at the time, the headlines were non-stop, and people were criticizing Facebook's ability to innovate, saying that this cloning strategy created a mess for them. Now, if you actually go deeper into the story, there was a really, really important reason why they had to do this. So for many years, Facebook watched Snapchat take away a core segment of their audience away from them. That was college students. Now, if Facebook can't actively recruit new generations, this will lead to the inevitable death of Facebook. So this was a book that Facebook gave to all of their employees, which documented their principles. And this is one of their principles that says, if we don't create the thing that kills Facebook, somebody else will. Now, this kind of shows the extent that Facebook will go to actually ensure their relevancy. And then they have another principle that documents how they do this. So 6 months or 30 years, every 6 months they'll reevaluate their company strategy and make sure that they can continue to remain relevant. So, what seemed like shameless cloning actually was a core part of their company's identity and their company's principles. So remember those headlines? They all completely started to change. And Instagram completely crushed Snapchat's metrics within a few months of launch. Now, we're not saying that copying products is a good idea, but we can see how a company's principles can really inform their business decisions as well as more tangible UI decisions within the product.
So just to quickly explain what we mean when we say universal principles. So universal principles are statements that encapsulate mutually recognized shared beliefs, motives, intents, or expectations. They are something that give your design decisions, engineering decisions, business decisions, authenticity, something that translates your essence of your company and you as a people into the product or solutions. And these are big ideas that unify all the people in the company, regardless of the discipline they work for. So just to go back to the example of the client we were working with, when they approached us, they just wanted the how bit, but they were not aware of the value of principles and culture. And nobody said it's going to be easy, right? We started doing UI and UX assessment, and we discovered so much more. The hole was going really deep. So the first thing is that there was a vast difference in opinions what a good design decision means, or what the value looks like, or what the success means.
And there was varying opinions on well, there was a lack of evidence-based process within their product development cycle. So it was mainly delivery focused. Success was determined by how many tickets were completed in the Jira board, for instance, without any sense of measurement of what value that's creating for the end users. And being that it was a healthcare product, the end users were not only patients, but they were clinics, GP clinics, as well as the organizations that manage those clinics. So the user group was really wide. And not only was there issues within that measurement of success, but also there was a lack of clarity within the team structure. So designers and engineers working very separately, and no real efficient communication between the two disciplines, and not just design and engineering, but also between marketing and the business decisions. So there was also issues within the cultural level, not just the principal level. And when I say culture, what I'm talking about is how we talk and listen to other people and how far we're willing to look outside our own box. And when I say box, I mean more domain-specific boxes, as well as the mindset and openness to other people's standpoints and their mindset as well.
So this is why we're going to illustrate how, at least from our perspective, these universal principles, discipline non-specific principles, and culture are the foundation of a design system and generally a healthy product, service, or an organization. So here's a very short version of how the whole process went with the client. Oops, you did not see that. Wipe it from your memory. So, understanding the lack of unity between different departments, I realized that we need to go back and understand what drives the company as a whole, which meant that we had to talk to stakeholders, people from different departments, people from different disciplines, what drives them personally, what are their motives, what are their intentions, how they understand value, how they understand success, what they want to achieve, how they want to be seen by the public. And if anyone is familiar with brand design, which is basically understanding the essence of the company, we apply the same method. We just interviewed a bunch of people and asked these questions, which resulted in a humongous pool of statements.
And while Antonas was doing that, I was working on doing an overall assessment on the health of the product. So kickstarting this discovery period with getting data from existing customers, as well as working together with a user researcher of the client team and mapping user interview data as well as usability testing data across the entire product experience, not limited to the digital experience, but also the different touch points in the journey, even finding out what the marketing brochures were telling the customers in GP surgeries and figuring out how that looks as a conversation. And it was, we were both kind of doing this discovery on a principal level as well as the product level to begin with.
Next slide. Look at us running towards obsolescence. It was great. We were 12 at that time. Look at us. We're now 47 both. Now, once I had all these answers from stakeholders and a lot of different statements about the values and success, we had to rectify that somehow. And usually, you will end up with 3 things from the analysis. You will have themes that reoccur, so things that people agree on, so there's an area overlap. There will be statements that will be compatible but not necessarily similar, so things that complement each other, and the most complicated part, statements that contradict. Now, these are very, very important because no matter how good your design team is, or your engineering team is, or marketing team is, if you don't have singular, consistent vision for the future, you will always have conflicting directions, and you will never be able to deliver something that is valuable for the user. So, the moment you identify these contradictions, you take it back to the stakeholders, and you include them in all of these practices of analyzing data. You try to rectify that before you do any design or engineering work. So once we had all the wrinkles ironed out and we understood the themes, we could start translating them into principles. And again, principles that are not specific to UI or UX or engineering or marketing, but something that would serve as a humongous, big, overarching idea. And I'm going to give you an example of a principle that we have defined for the client and just compare it to some other principles that you might come across when using design systems. Sometimes you open a design system and it says, we are consistent, and that's pretty much it. And that is very easy to interpret differently, which is why, for us, a principle has to encapsulate a clear statement of intention and the value that we're trying to generate. So in case of the healthcare product we were working on, we tried to imbue the principle with that. So in this case, we try to empower people to live healthier and happier lives by providing seamless and frictionless access to universal, timely, relevant, and intelligent public health care. So this statement both explains the intention and the properties we want the product to have.
So while Antonas was doing that, we would, going back to the product data now, getting the client team involved with absorbing how good some of the product areas were and some of the areas of failure. And this allowed us to really reveal that priorities may not be in the right place at that time. So just to give an example, one of the features of the product which wasn't part of the initial scope when we had come on board was a symptom checker, and that's where you can do a digital diagnosis of your symptoms. And this became a huge area of concern because there was so much negative feedback from users of the product at that time, where a business decision was to use a chatbot interface because that was the thing at the time.
Super dope, super in vogue, very popular. Everybody loves a good chatbot. Now, once we finally had principles, and again, you can revisit them and refine them, but we had something that could be applied universally across different teams, could be a unifying idea across different people. We could start using those principles to measure previous and new design decisions, to limit our spectrum of choices to something that fits our specific product. And I'm going to give you an example. So let's say we have two versions of the same feature. It's a symptom checking feature that allows people to assess how screwed up they are. And on the left side, we have something that looks like a chatbot. It requires the user to perform multiple actions per screen. It's really densely packed with information. And on the right-hand side, we have a UI that is stripped down. It's the same content, just the manner in which the product behaves and how the information is structured is much simpler. The answer is binary, yes, no. There's less information to consume. Now, there can be multiple arguments, either for the first or for the second one. Marketing specialists will say, hey, come on, the left one is so dope because, chatbots, we love them. Engineers will say maybe, potentially, that the right option is easier to build. So which one do we go with? So this is why we have principles, because they are unified criteria for value and quality. Since we have a principle that declares our intention to build a universally accessible product, it means that we want to take into consideration people who have diminished dexterity in their fingers, people with arthritis, people who might have cognitive disabilities and might have issues digesting a lot of information per instance, which is why we have a clear differentiator and ability to choose which solution, UI and UX-wise, is better. And again, this is just an example in terms of UI and UX, but it also has implications for the business side of things.
So at this point, when we've managed to prioritize certain areas of the product that we want to focus on, and at this point, before even designing anything or coming up with any solutions, it was important for us to pull a lot of or assign experts to this problem. So if it's a symptom checker, at this point we'd indicate that we need someone from the clinical team who sits really far away, or someone from an architect from the engineering team if it was a big change, and having engineers in the room as well. So we would make sure that was clear, and we don't have just a designer creating a solution in isolation and then handing that over to an engineer at a further stage of the process.
Now, the more relevant bit for those who love to fetishize design systems. Once we started evaluating our previous decisions and making new decisions based on the principles, we could finally start creating UI components, UX patterns, engineering solutions that were imbued with our values. Principles became implicit in those components, and that created the meat on the bones of the design system. So we could finally start creating assets, structuring them, documenting them. This is the legwork. Still very important, but it isn't formed by the universal principles that everyone shares in the company.
So as that was being formulated, and we've prioritized and assigned experts to a problem we wanted to solve, we're now in the room with the different people, and there was a really interesting story here in this problem-solving part where we were going to solve, let's say, the symptom checker, and we had an engineer in the room, and he'd said to me, is this you trying to get me to do your design work for you?
She made him do the worst thing possible. She made an engineer use a Sharpie. Boo!
And this marked a key shift in the culture because a couple of weeks later in the retro, he had actually demanded to be involved in all of the design workshops and said how important it was, because later on when he'd actually received the design, it was something that he had input in, so he had contributed to it, meaning that collaboration further down the line was more for QA and less for, oh, well, why did you do it this way? And now, don't get me wrong, like Antonas said, it's not easy. They were still working in large teams. So these small bursts of cross-functional collaboration was, someone had to take ownership of it and pull people in and say that it's really essential that you're part of this workshop or that you're part of solving this problem, and making them really aware of how important it is for them to be there, because there was so much reluctancy as I had never done it before.
Now, we're approaching a beautiful moment when the party on the left and the right join together. Now that we had principles, then we had the basis of the design system, and we have initiated the cultural shift to participate, for everyone to participate in the process. We could finally start to open up the design system work for more input. So we started accepting contributions for a wider circle of people and supporting the product work in a very streamlined fashion, increasing the productivity.
So this is a point.
Look, we haven't used it for your night.
So as Yaeli mentioned earlier, that a design system team can be like really, really small, and that's how it was on this particular client. But having somebody that represents the design system within those problem-solving workshops means that we end up with an output that meets the needs of the user. It's driven by data, as it's driven by data. It also meets the needs of the company, as all of the work that was created in that design system was informed by company principles.
It was a bittersweet moment when the baby has grown and left the nest. Just to summarize, so what are we talking here about? Again, we're not dismissing the value of building blocks, and we're not saying all design systems are focusing on the how and not why. We just want to reinforce, invite you to consider this more often, the value of having a shared understanding, not just between designers and engineers, but actually having understanding between market specialists and business owners, and making the design system not just a tool for designers and engineers, but a gravity center for everyone in the company. And in our opinion, the universal principles that are not specific to a discipline and the culture are the foundation of a design system or a successful product and company.
And if we had just gone in and said, yeah, well, great, we'll do all of this for you, and without fixing or addressing the principles and the culture piece, it would have inevitably set them up for failure. And so we truly believe that those are the heart of your design system.
Exactly. With that said, please send your hate mail and your love mail to Twitter. This is lovely.